What's up, Madrids? Happy Wednesday. This is Kiyan Sobhani. Wanted to hit you with some bonus content today. What you're about to listen to is taken from last night's post-game podcast that went up over on patreon.com/managingmadrid. About 15 minutes after the game, Euan, McTear, and I hopped on Zoom. We're joined by a bunch of patrons to break down last night. But really, to be quite honest with you, it wasn't so much about the game. We didn't go that deep in analysis with that one. But we did do a very long podcast talking about big picture stuff. And we took questions live on the call towards the end of the analysis. And this particular segment, you'll hear discussion on Alvaro Rodriguez and the way Real Madrid have managed both him and Arribas, as well as what I think is one of Real Madrid's biggest flaws when it comes to squad building that they have actually improved on, but they need to continually improve on. And a whole spiel on football identities and why a lot of the dialogue surrounding it is a little bit farcical, in my opinion. So that's what you're about to listen to today. The entire podcast was quite lengthy. Obviously, we did not include the whole thing. But if you want analysis on the performances of the Real Madrid players last night, Ancelotti's post-game quotes, referees, which was a big talking point, and much more, that's over on patreon.com/managingmadrid. Get in on that action because next week against Manchester City, we're doing the live post-game podcast exclusively for patrons as well. So get in on that action, patreon.com/managingmadrid. And without further ado, here is today's clip. Let's go. I guess the biggest talking point tonight was the slight optimism that some fans had that some of the Castilla kids were in the squad. Nico Paz, Sergio Arribas, Carlos Tortor, Alvaro Rodriguez. Is that it? Was someone else?
I think that's it.
That's it. Okay.
The goalkeeper, but yeah.
Okay. So, maybe some people thought that these guys would get some playing time. Turns out Mariano Diaz starts. So I guess this is my question to you that I'm posing. It does seem like sometimes maybe I have something against Mariano Diaz. I don't inherently have something against Mariano Diaz. I'm just frustrated that this guy is getting minutes over the Castilla kids. In part, this is the reason why, because Mariano Diaz is not going to be a Real Madrid player next year. He has nothing to play for. He has nothing to prove to us. And even if he did a terrible job of proving his worth today. There are kids who deserve playing time. And I also, just looking at the Castilla schedule, because there's an argument to be made that, like, look, these guys are fighting to make it to Segunda. That's the focus. But these guys don't play until Sunday, and there's a lot of time to rest. So that's my gripe with it. But I'm curious to know what your perception of it was and where you stand on this.
Yeah, I mean, so we're recording this right now while Ancelotti hasn't spoken yet. He's probably just about to, so we don't know what he's going to say. But I know what he's going to say. He's going to say that go to the schedule, which is at Castilla. Yeah, they don't play till next Sunday, but they just played on Sunday. So they just played 2 days ago. So that's not 72 hours rest. Not enough time to be starting these guys, blah, blah, blah. I don't buy that. These guys are young. These guys are 18. Alvaro Rodriguez, sure, he started on Sunday. He played. He scored in that last game for Castilla. He's 18 years old. He can play. He can start these games. He can get more than just half an hour that he got. The other kids can get more than, the crumbs. They can play. They can start these games for an hour. If fatigue becomes an issue, you take them off. You don't bring them on in a game like this. So that's the excuse I'm sure Ancelotti will give, is that the schedule. I think that's partly because Real Madrid are annoyed about their upcoming Saturday, Tuesday turnaround. It would be a bit hypocritical to then play players who just played Sunday, Tuesday, but these are teenagers. These are not, Madrids. These are not Benzema. These are teenagers who can play, a couple of times Sunday to Tuesday turnaround. So that's the excuse they'll give. I thought they should have deserved more. Alvaro Rodriguez in particular. I mean, I don't know what happened there, because after the derby, after a couple of good performances, we thought he might get a few starts along the way. Never happened, and just kind of left out of the picture with, like you mentioned, the excuse of Castilla games are important right now. Castilla didn't play tonight. They could have got valuable minutes, and Mariano got them instead. And I like the way you put it, 10 men for the whole game. Mariano for the first hour, and then after Carvajal got sent off around about that exact same time.
Well, just to, again, this is not an absolute attack on Mariano, but the truth is that, and I didn't check by the end of it, maybe I'll pull it up now. At halftime, he had 8 touches. It was 13
by the end when he went off.
incredibly non-existent. Like and I made this point on Twitter too. He's not really, doing much defensively behind the ball. He's not working that hard. You look at some of these defensive sequences, we're going into these 4-5-1 blocks, and Mariano's just kind of floating around and not really doing anything. And then on offense, he's just not getting involved. He's not making great runs. Rodrigo, I felt, was like a one-man transition attacking player today, and did not have much help. And I think also, just to go back to this, the point about the 72 hours and all this stuff, like, again, I get it that I will be the first to say that Castilla should be in Segunda. Like, you should, or at the very least, you should make every single effort possible to get Castilla to Segunda. That should be a mandate of the Real Madrid board. So I'm totally okay with prioritizing that. But I also think, again, 1 week, and you put it, the fact that these guys are younger legs, and these standards were not apparent for Vinicius when he went to Brazil and played within like less than 48 hours or whatever it was last season. Arribas obviously coming off a hat trick on the weekend. Alvaro scoring too, like you mentioned. So that's just one thing that I want to say. But I also wonder, I guess I'm kind of surprised. I would like to know the exact thinking, and I'm sure we'll get the Carlo post-game quotes while we're recording, so we can kind of tackle it as those quotes come in. But what puts Mariano in contention to play today and not Hazard? Is it just the fact that he wanted a target man, or?
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about should Mariano or Hazard have started, we're reaching a dark hole here. I mean, Hazard starting would have been not much better, probably about the same, just as offensive to the young players. That's not really the issue. It's more let the young players play or do something creative. Let Rodrigo play there. Ancelotti himself has said that, Rodrigo's so versatile. He can be a backup for Benzema in the future. Okay, I know Vinicius isn't there. It's a rare opportunity for him to play in the left wing. That's great if you're Rodrigo, but I'm sorry, Rodrigo. Let's be honest. Vinicius is playing pretty much every game for the next decade. So you're not going to play in the left wing. You are going to play at number 9 a lot. So have another chance to practice there and put, Marco Asensio on the left wing or someone else, and bring Lucas Vazquez in as a winger, something like this. There's many players I think who should have been there if Benzema wasn't. Rodrigo for me would have been even ahead of Mariano and Hazard. And yeah, I think we're both agreed that Alvaro Rodriguez was the obvious option. So I don't know what the thinking was. I don't know if it was tactical. I don't know if it was just rotation. Maybe it is that. I mean, let's be honest. Mariano isn't going to play the Copa del Rey final a single minute. Mariano isn't going to play the Manchester City first leg, second leg a single minute. This game didn't really matter. Why not put him up there and not risk injury? Not even Alvaro Rodriguez, for example, could come off the bench and be important in one of these games. Maybe Ancelotti just is thinking if these minutes don't mean anything, which is debatable, but that's one point of view. If these minutes don't mean anything anyway, why not give them to the player and he can suck up these minutes? The player who no one really minds too much if he gets tired or injured and doesn't play these big games. I don't know. That could be the thinking. Tactical, yeah. I don't think there's a big tactical galaxy brain thought of something was going to happen tonight with Mariano up front.
No, and sorry, to be clear, I was not advocating for Hazard to start. I was just kind of like just trying to figure out the reasoning as like what put Mariano like involved in this discussion, but not Hazard.
Probably.
Yeah. It's interesting because you and I remember had a podcast in Madrid the night of the derby. Was that the one where Alvaro comes in and scores the header?
Yeah. After he'd scored, we had the podcast like an hour after. Yeah.
And I remember like this was around the time when Alvaro was very limited sample size, was coming in and scoring a couple goals, right? In his very limited playing time and impressing.
Yeah, he came on against Osasuna and had like 2 assists, 1 counted, and then came on against Atletico and scored.
That's right.
Like 20 minutes total.
20 minutes, yeah. 20 minutes of very, very efficient football. And obviously around the time, he's going away with Uruguay too in the sub-20 tournament there and scoring a bunch of goals there. So like there was like a track record of him playing well and in form. And we started to ask the question, like, we don't really know yet because it's way too early. But there was some dialogue, and I think Ancelotti said in the press conference around that time that Alvaro is someone that we're gonna look at, next year. He's gonna be in the squad. Did he not actually come out and say that he's gonna be in the squad next year?
He said he's gonna be in the first team squad next season.
Right.
Yeah.
And so my thinking was like, and this was around the time when Alvaro was getting playing time and playing well with the A team. If the league is going to be done, I'd like to see more of Alvaro on the A team level just to see what we actually have on our hands here. Because if we're starting to make decisions of like signing X striker this summer, who is okay but not that interesting, but kind of just an okay player, well, we should give Alvaro some tryouts here to end the season just so we see what we actually have to actually properly evaluate him beyond what he does with Raul's Castilla, because we want to see him at a different level too. Because sometimes you see really good players with Castilla, but it doesn't translate to the professional level. So I just want to see more of that. I also thought it was just kind of brutal and unfortunate that Arribas comes in, and Arribas was he had 3 touches by the end of this game in the 9 plus 5 minutes injury time. In the 14 minutes, he had 3 touches. I thought it was just unfortunate and kind of like brutal that he came in that kind of game state. This was an impossible situation. You're down to 10 men. You're barely getting on the ball. It's a tough place to come in and try to impress yourself. And I just hope he's not unfairly judged on that too. I don't think he will be judged on that because I think Ancelotti's smart enough to know what was actually happening when he came on. But it would have been cool to see him in a different game state, in different context.
He's so unfortunate, and I don't know what the stat is now, but I remember, I think one of his last appearances, similar one, 10 minutes here, I went and looked at it because he's now made, like 10, 11 appearances for the first team, but has a total of like something like 120 minutes, something like this, because it's 10 minutes at a time, maybe half an hour here, maybe a 90th minute sub there to average it out, but more or less he's getting 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, really staccato. You can't make an impact like this. Some players come on and do. He even did, I think, was it the Club World Cup or whatever it was, but like, you're not making an impact in that amount of time. Give a player half an hour, come on the 60th minute. Yeah, you can evaluate that half an hour because that's a decent amount of time. For Alvaro today, maybe not because it's 10 minutes, but I mean in general, bringing these young players on with half an hour, okay, that's interesting. But giving them just 10 minutes every time, you never give these players a chance to make an impact. And some people will just look at the appearance stats and say, this guy's played a dozen times for Real Madrid. I don't remember anything. And that's unfair on these guys. They deserve a proper game and not just 10 minutes spread out over a dozen different matches, which really, in particular, is the case of Arribas.
This is also why I don't get. I think sometimes we just get these things wrong as like a collective decision-making model, the way we handle these things. Because there were games where Alvaro was called up to our squad instead of the Castilla squad. Meanwhile, not only is he not helping Castilla, he's also playing 1 minute coming on like the 89th minute for us. So he's not neither playing for us nor helping Castilla. And I just don't understand how we come up to that conclusion that that's a good idea for anyone. It's a lose, lose, lose. Lose for our team, lose for Castilla, lose for Alvaro. I don't get some of these decisions that we make. It's pretty nonsensical. But yeah, I sometimes feel like it's like a little bit arbitrary and doesn't mean much when we include these players in the squad. Like sometimes you'll see, ex Castilla player has been called up to the Champions League squad, and it really doesn't mean anything other than he just gets to get on an airplane with the A team, and that's cool, I guess. But it doesn't really mean much for anyone. Felix, you have another question?
Yeah, I'll be brief. Thank you for taking it. So I was speaking to my friend who's a Barcelona fan, and he was saying, "Don't worry, you guys will magically turn it all around versus City like you always do." And from his perspective, I understand why he would fear that, but I really don't think it's a flex to say, "Look, we can play terrible and then magically get a last-minute game winner." I think it shows weakness that we have to do all these comebacks and that we lose one game against I'm not saying Sociedad is a bad team, but we can lose against anybody and then beat PSG in the Champions League. I think our inconsistency in general through the last, few years is really worrisome. Zidane, Ancelotti, different coaches, different players. I mean, I don't know what it is, but we are just not consistent in our focus and in our play. And I agreed with the first question very much that I forget who asked, but that we rely on our individual brilliance, and that's okay when you have Cristiano Ronaldo, Benzema, Bale, Modric, Kroos, but our next generation is not going to be that. We need a system to be consistent. We need, with our defenders, why are we letting in so many goals? Why are we letting in goals against Girona, Almeria? Today should have been 4-0. So I think the inconsistency is really, really worrisome, whether or not we can squeeze out a Champions League win.
I would just say this is Real Madrid. This has always been Real Madrid. They've always won Champions Leagues in years when they've maybe had a bad league campaign. And just your point there about, you name some of the great players of the current sort of generation on the way out, and you say we won't have that again. They will. It's Real Madrid. Maybe you never get a midfield quite like this because maybe it's the best of all time. But you look at the Real Madrid squad in general, and it's pretty consistently a top three squad in the world since going back decades and decades. It's Real Madrid. They're always going to have the best players. There's always going to be new stars coming through, and some of these players you mentioned are on the way out. It's a shame to see them go, but you look at some of the ones who are coming through, or some of the ones who will be bought in the transfer market, and they'll be just as good. Maybe not in the same positions, but overall the squad, I think, will be just as good because it's Real Madrid.
So this is a completely valid concern in my opinion, and I think one of the things that Real Madrid doesn't do well is that it tends to measure success solely on the final result and not the process itself. And I think the better way to analyze and to improve the team is to look at the process and not the final trophy. Because I think if you look at the entire holistic picture, you're forced to make upgrades to the squad in a different way. Whereas if you look at, let's say, 100 and let's just say like 130 minutes of bad performances, and then 20-minute burst in the second leg to get the job done in advance. I think it's great to have that gear to click into. But if you're looking at this from a top-down perspective and you're the board and you're trying to construct the squad, you can't look at a 20-minute blitz. You have to look at the entire season and look at the good stuff, but then really scrutinize to see what went wrong in the season and what would have happened if a ball bounced a different way. Lucas and I talked about this on the Giannis and Carlo Ancelotti podcast yesterday, I think it was, where we said, like, if Courtois doesn't save Messi's penalty in the first leg, how do you change your plan in the summertime and you're eliminated against PSG in the round of 16 instead of that little domino trickling into the fact that you eventually win the Champions League? Those are the fine margins we're talking about. And so you have to look at what goes wrong in the season, regardless of if you win the trophy or not, and continually upgrade the squad and change the things that are not going wrong to sustain winning. Otherwise, because what is real is basically what's happening for the majority of the season. It's not the gears you click in and out of. So the gears you click in and out of in many ways are basically down to transcendence, great people doing great things in a single moment. But you have to look at the holistic picture of how to sustain and how to maximize those moments so that you don't rely on 20 minutes. You can actually get the job done earlier in the game because you've learned and you've improved. So I do think this is actually a weakness of Real Madrid, is that they will, and they've gotten better at it, to be honest, because when I was a kid, we signed Beckham and sold Makelele. So that is not that's not an analytic look. It's not a sporting look to improve your team. And so we've come a long way since then, in my opinion. And I think we've even come a long way in the last 5-6 years. But I think it continually needs to improve. It's a valid concern, Felix.
And why does Real Madrid never look for a specific sort of philosophy, same as other basically pretty much every other club? We got Juventus, we got Bayern Munich, we got even Chelsea, we got Man City these years, we got Manchester United, we got Barcelona, I said it, we got even Arsenal, but Real Madrid. And I think the best philosophical approach can be German football. Pretty much it is physical. It's very offensive. It's pretty much most efficient sort of football, and they're pretty much only a philosophical approach that basically can beat any other sort of football ideas. Like, I don't know, you can say total football of Dutch that is played many years by Barcelona, or like Italian football. Why don't we approach it? It's just pretty much the most dominant sort of style of football. We had some German coaches, Jupp Heynckes, we got Bernard Schuster, if I'm not wrong, he was coaching Madrid, but we should approach that sort of football, and it's pretty much sustainable. It has been answered for pretty much 70 years for Bayern Munich. Why not for us?
The answer to this question, really, Ramtin, is that Real Madrid don't care to be married to one single football ideology. And I think there are limitations to maybe not having that specific identity from year to year. But at the same time, they've also been more successful than anyone, partly because they've been tactically malleable. And, they can go into a counterattack against Pep's Bayern, or they can go into, another season, 16, 17, control and high press like they did under Zidane. And I think that's actually suited them. And I think it's difficult to sustain a certain ideology from one era to the next, because every coach is different, and every coach is different in part because we don't have a sporting director who makes sure that every single coach has one certain football philosophy. And every club is kind of different. And, the funny thing with this is that, like Barca, for example, who are the stereotypical, Cruyff total football, that, they had that ideology really only until Cruyff came along, and Cruyff himself was incredibly, I think, mislabeled in some extent. Like Eduardo Alvarez has talked about this, and I went back and rewatched those Clásicos when Cruyff was a manager from my book. And for example, the Copa del Rey final where we placed Cruyff's Barca, no one would even think that this was true, but in that Copa del Rey final, Real Madrid against Barcelona, I think it was 80 or something? I have to go back and look at the date. Real Madrid dominated Barcelona, high press, control. Barcelona played an extremely low block and kicked the shit out of us. And now, like, it's just like, and then, they have had maybe that Pep stint, and maybe Xavi's plays a certain way now. But I also think like they are labeled as this thing where they've only played that style of football like for a few years, if you really think about it. And then when Luis Enrique came along, his philosophy was different. He played much more direct transition attacks with MSN, and then Ernesto Valverde came along. He had a certain philosophy. Koeman was completely different. So I also think that some of these teams that are labeled a certain way are like that in only phases of their club. But anyways, I'm not against, like, to be quite honest with you, and maybe this is because I have recency bias. I just finished Ryan O'Hanlon's book called Net Gains. It's a really great book about analytics and the evolution of football. And basically the conclusion is, after many, many studies, probably the statistically best way to win in football is to control possession in the opponent's half and press, because that generates mathematically the most chances over and over again. And then at that point, it's a numbers game. The more chances you have, the more chances you have of putting the ball in the back of the net. Whereas like last year, Real Madrid, it was all about maximizing and scoring improbable low XG off of like a few Vinicius transition attacks. So, but I do think like it's a long-winded way of saying I don't think Real Madrid will ever go into that mode where this is the philosophy and that's it. It's very possible that Raul, could come one day and play this high-octane pressing football, and then the next time a coach comes along, it's a different tactic, but it works as well. I don't know. I'm just making shit up now, but I don't think we have to be married to a certain ideology. I don't know if you had any thoughts on this, Euan.
No, I think what Real Madrid do is the right way to approach it. Real Madrid has always been about get the best players and we'll fit something and a coach around it. And if it doesn't work, we try something else. And they prioritize get the best players, get them on good contracts, and if you have the best players, you have the best chance to win. The structure, the coaching, the philosophy can come later. And I totally agree with what you said, Kiyan, about some of these teams that maybe we consider as being like this or like that. Actually, when you look at it, aren't. It's a bit more of an easy label to put on a certain club. But I mean, just look at the Barcelona team that's going to win the league this year. They just had their 11th 1-0 of the season tonight, which it matches the record for 1-0 wins in a La Liga season. You know, this is not the Barcelona philosophy that most people would imagine, but you know, Barcelona have been able to adapt, and you know, maybe people aren't happy about the way they play at the Camp Nou. Some angry fans tonight going to another 1-0, but that's the best thing for them. Just like it's the best thing for Real Madrid is to be able to be adaptable and you know, suit depending on the players you have, because you know, you can't just be wedded to one philosophy for an entire club's existence. That can't happen, and like Kiyan said, it never really has actually happened with any second club.
The funny thing is that, like, you look at this Barca team, I wonder where they would be in the title without Ter Stegen. Their expected goals against are 24, and they've only conceded 11 goals from that. It's pretty incredible what they've managed to scrape through here. You know, they deserve to win the championship, but it's interesting kind of how, like, you know, how much difference a goalkeeper can make in this
It's
situation.
like, it's really similar actually to like a lot of what happened last year with Real Madrid, where Courtois was also, it's like you take Courtois out, where Real Madrid, but Real Madrid are quite happy, fans and club and everyone involved, to say, yeah, we don't mind that we're winning in large part because of Thibaut Courtois, because he's one of our 11 players and we went out and bought him, and this is part of the plan.
It's fair.
Whereas you say that to maybe fans of Barcelona, and they might be a bit more reluctant or even like offended to admit that it's down to the goalkeeper a lot, because it is a bit more of this idea of, no, we should play a certain philosophy. But behind the scenes, I think at Barcelona, they're just as content, most people, most directors, at Ter Stegen helping them win the league, because he's also a player who, you know, they've signed a new contract and he's one of the 11 players. And, you know, it's all just about perceptions at different clubs. And at the end of the day, most clubs prioritize the players over a philosophy, because if you don't do that, you're not going to win this. At the end of the day, the differences in football are usually down to who has the most talent in their 25-man squad.